Hey, Lauren, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for joining us on the Sourdough Mamas podcast. I know I'm really excited, and I think a lot of our listeners are really excited too, because a lot of people have heard about Einkorn, and some people might be thinking, what is Einkorn? Is it, what even is it? They might not even know that it's a type of flour. And so we have all of the questions today. So really excited to have you here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So let's just start out by telling us, maybe you can tell us a bit about your sourdough journey.
It's pretty straightforward. I'm sure it sounds a lot like everybody else's. I started baking sourdough several decades ago, but I really was just a dabbler. I didn't ever really, do it every weekend or anything. So I was familiar with traditional sourdough and baked with it on and off intermittently throughout the year. And then about 5 years ago, I started working here at Jovial. And one of the things that intrigued me was the bread and the cookbook, which we'll talk about. And within a few weeks of working here, I started an Einkorn starter. And that really kind of got me back into it. So I've been doing Einkorn and traditional sourdough for the past 5 years more consistently now.
Oh, that's
So
great.
yeah,
Yeah,
yep.
that's great. So I mean, I think you had an introduction into Einkorn a little earlier than most people. I think
Mhm.
just by nature of working at Jovial Foods. Is that the first time you had heard of Einkorn?
It was, yep. I had heard of emmer. So Einkorn briefly is just an ancient form of wheat. It is the most ancient type of wheat. So if you've ever heard of emmer or spelt or kamut, also known as khorasan, those are ancient cousins of Einkorn. And I hadn't actually heard of it being cultivated or used for baking and until I started working here. And Carla's cookbook, Einkorn Recipes for Nature's Original Wheat, came out in 2015, I believe, and I started here in 2017. So I think I kind of heard the cookbook. I worked at a bookstore before this, and she had done a signing locally, and that's where I first kind of came on my radar
Oh, very
again.
cool. Wow.
Yeah,
That's a really neat way to be introduced
yeah,
to the brand, to the book and everything.
yeah,
That's really cool. Um,
yeah.
so I think it's really neat that you work for a food company.
Mhm.
Me being like a food lover, food blogger, obviously I'm like all about food, cooking,
Yeah.
baking. Can you kind of describe your role there and what it's like working with such a common interest with your coworkers?
Yeah, it's we're actually, I guess I would say mostly a distributor here in Connecticut. All of the products we sell, including Einkorn, and we have a whole line of pasta products, allergen sensitive pastas. We do a whole line of really popular brown rice pasta. All the products are made and grown and produced in Italy. So we receive them here in Connecticut and distribute to all the large grocery distributors and directly through our e-commerce site. So we really work closely together on quality control, on messaging. We want to make sure people understand that the integrity of the product, the integrity of the farmers, the growers of Carla and her husband, who are over in Italy, controlling all the aspects of production very closely. And I work in customer service. I help run the e-commerce site. So if you buy flour from the site or you buy the cookbook and you have questions, if you email and call, it's me that you will get answering that. I work in the marketing department, so closely with people who are kind of in charge of the imaging and the social media. We're not actually too big of a company. There's less than 30 of us total.
Oh, wow.
And
That
yeah,
was going to be my next question, actually.
yeah,
So, yeah, so very small, very family.
small.
Yeah, like a
Yep,
family.
yep,
Right.
yep. So it's nice. We're good friends, and they're all great people. So it's a good place
Yeah,
to work.
that's so great.
Yeah.
It just sounds amazing. What is it that makes Einkorn so special? I think you touched on it very briefly, but let's kind of dive into it because there's probably a lot of listeners that have never heard of Einkorn,
Mhm.
and or maybe some who have and they're just interested in it. So you did mention that it's an ancient form of wheat. What
Mhm.
I found really interesting from the Einkorn cookbook, which I've been
Mhm.
totally geeking out on, is that and correct me if I get it wrong, but it's the only type of wheat that has not been messed with, for lack of a
Correct.
better word, right? It hasn't been
Yes.
hybridized. It hasn't been changed at all. It still has its original number of chromosomes.
Yes.
And that's because it originally it had a poor yield and the farmers just didn't even want to deal
Yeah.
with it. Is that right? So they just kind of ignored it
Yeah.
and like put it on the back shelf. And now we have
Yeah.
this like pristine version of wheat, so of einkorn. So yeah,
Yes.
can you tell us a bit more about that in detail with probably more technical terms than what I'm using?
Yeah. I have a lot of terminology in my head, but I'll do my best to sort of speak simply. So it is nature's original wheat. So it basically when centuries ago, when they started to cultivate, when agriculture, at the dawn of agriculture, this was something that they could grow and it would yield, it would yield something. They could make it to flour, they could cook the grain itself raw, and it was very nutritious. As time evolved and the planet, kind of grew and populations grew, and this is much more modern times. I'm talking after 1900. That farmers needed to get a better yield. Per acre, einkorn does not yield enough to feed thousands and thousands of people. But so they were hybridizing the wheat and changing it so that the shaft was shorter, so that they could drive a machine over it and harvest easier. Einkorn's very, very tall. And so if there's a big windstorm or a lot of rain, it will get knocked down and the harvest machinery will not be able to harvest it easily. It also has a husk on it, so you have to dehusk it in order to access the grain. So a lot of reasons why hybridization kind of took over. It was the need to feed more people. But the result of that was, similar to the supermarket tomato or the supermarket strawberry. You lost flavor, you lose nutritional value, and you gain production, but you lose other things. So when Carla's daughter had some health issues when she was young, and Rodolfo, her husband, was in agriculture, still is, and they kind of discovered this ancient form of wheat that no one was growing anymore. It was literally in a seed bank somewhere, and they convinced a farmer to try to grow a few acres for them. And I'm really summarizing here, but she started, playing with it, working with it, and her daughter saw significant benefit from it. And primarily it's that the gluten is very different. So einkorn's gluten is weak and brittle, and it makes it more digestible than modern wheat with that really stretchy, high tension gluten that we're used to.
Right.
Yeah.
So she and her husband literally went to the seed bank and like pulled out this seed, and it wasn't being grown anywhere else.
People were just shaking their heads like, we're not going to be bothered with that. This is just too much work and no one grows that anymore and it's not profitable. And she managed to convince a couple of really special farmers that it was worth the trouble. And she was already kind of getting into gluten-free rice, growing rice for pasta. She was well on her way with a successful business. And she was like, no, I think we need to give this a try. And was seeing success and seeing dramatic difference in her daughter. So she really went to bat. And honestly, I think she's responsible for einkorn, revival. Anyone who's growing it now is growing it because Carla started to grow it.
Wow.
For sure.
That, I mean, I knew that she was a pioneer in einkorn. I didn't realize that she was the pioneer in einkorn. How cool.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure people who grow ancient grains have been dabbling in it, but Carla really, to bring the flour to market and to really, to write the cookbook, to do all the research she did on the grain and how it's different and how to modify recipes. That was all, she was very much the pioneer in that. So.
Wow, that's so fascinating. And then, so you mentioned quickly about the gluten structure. I have heard a lot of questions about the like einkorn and gluten content. So it's not gluten free? Is it low in gluten, or is it just different? Like, how can we?
It's just different. I'm kind of a visual person, and I must have seen this somewhere, but it has as much gluten as modern wheat, but the gluten is just a bunch of strands of protein strung together. And so if you kind of see it as if it were a graph, modern wheat gluten would be very long, graph bars on the bar graph.
Okay.
They would go along the same distance along the bottom, but einkorn would have very, very short bar graphs. So in other words, that the content, the quantity is the same, but the quality is different. It's short, it's brittle, if you looked under a microscope, you would not see those long strings of proteins that make up that strong gluten. So,
Got it. Got it.
yep.
And so it makes it more digestible. And then is it also what makes it have more of like a tighter crumb as opposed to the giant open lacy crumb that we see with the traditional wheat?
Yes, exactly. So
Okay.
you will get, I think that's a big part of like the education that I do with customers and people who, have the cookbook is you won't get the big bubbles. You won't get, a very chewy crust. You're going to get a dense crumb, and your starter is going to be tighter. Your levain or, whatever you're making is going to be tighter and more delicate. You have to use a lighter touch. You don't want to use a KitchenAid mixer to mix up you're not building gluten when you're working with einkorn. You're breaking it down. So you have to be very careful and gentle.
Okay. Interesting. So it is a completely different approach.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have been, since we kind of set up this call, for the listeners, just want to kind of give a little background.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reason I reached out to you all, because I found this cookbook and I was blown away. And so I reached out to Jovial Foods, was connected with Lauren, and we chatted, and she recommended that I try to do a starter. And so I did. And if you're watching on YouTube, this is what my einkorn starter looks like now. I just fed it last night. So it rose about double or maybe even close to triple the amount that I had in there. It's very bubbly and it looks very light. I have not yet baked sourdough with it. I was just telling Lauren that I was looking at the recipe in the cookbook. I think I'm going to try it tomorrow. But what I did make is the empanadas, which are close to the back of the book. I made those 2 nights ago for dinner. I had chicken, so I did chicken empanadas instead of, I believe she does the classic beef. I'm looking right now.
I think they're bean,
yeah, the lean ground beef. So I did them with chicken, and I mean, they were just amazing. It was so fun, first of all, to work with that dough.
Yeah.
And rolling it out, it was really easy to roll out. It was very like silky and smooth. It says to lightly flour your counter. I didn't even need to, because it was so easy to work with. And and I baked them up, and my husband and kids were blown away. My kids are 5, 3, and 19 months old, and they devoured them. They loved them.
Good.
Yeah.
It's got amazing flavor. I have to say, sometimes white flour, there's no flavor. And that's one thing about einkorn that I love, is there actually is a flavor, and it's lovely. It's delicate. People say nutty, kind of sweet. It's hard to describe, but it has a great flavor.
Yeah, and that's why I'm really excited to make this actual sourdough loaf. Because it was a bit overpowered with the chicken and the cayenne and stuff like that. But they were really good. So
Good.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to explore a bit more in that cookbook. So I did have an email question, and I think we touched on it real quickly about Carla's daughter, but einkorn, Marcia actually emailed me and she said, how does einkorn affect those with digestive issues?
So that we basically said it already. It definitely is not safe for celiac. So unfortunately, I think there's a lot of people that are like, oh, I'm going to be able to have wheat again. It does contain gluten, so it's not safe for anyone who has celiac disease. But and I can't speak scientifically, but people who use einkorn and have digestive problems with gluten, or have had historical problems with gluten, tend to be able to eat einkorn without the same problems. And you'll notice when I'm eating it, I actually feel there's a different mouthfeel to it. It's very high in protein. It's very high in a lot of minerals and so forth. So it breaks down kind of quicker in your mouth, I would say. And I suppose the same is true in your digestive system, because that gluten is very weak. Gluten, the properties of gluten gets in your stomach, and there's not that long stretchy gluten for your digestive system to have to break down. So tends to be much easier for people to eat than modern wheat. And you don't necessarily have to bake. I mean, Jovial makes einkorn pasta. If you just want to see if you can tolerate einkorn, we make pasta. It's just flour and water. You could cook that up and actually eat that, and just see if that agrees with you before having to dive into the whole baking thing.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
And sourdough crackers we make cookies. And so there are a lot of ways to kind of try it out without having to bake a whole loaf of bread and see if you can tolerate it or not.
Right. And so before I forget this question, I picked up the Jovial Foods Einkorn all-purpose flour at Whole Foods.
Mhm.
Is
Mhm.
Whole Foods a supplier of the other products as well, or what's the best way for listeners to try to find your products?
Yeah, so we do have a store locator. It's jovialfoods.com. Whole Foods is a great vendor for us. Most stores carry several Jovial products. Often they will carry maybe one flour, but not the other. We make an all-purpose, which is the whole wheat with 20% of the bran and germ removed. So we also have a whole wheat flour, which is just the wheat berries ground into flour. And then the all-purpose is not a white flour, it's a high extraction, like I said, only 20% less bran and germ than the whole wheat.
Right.
That's our most popular because it's a little easier to work with, and that's commonly found in Whole Foods. Our website is obviously a great place because if you order from us, we ship it directly from here, and my friend Matt downstairs packs the order. Amazon, we have a Healthy Pantry as our partner. Amazon's an easy place to pick up flour.
That's true. I got a 2-pack of your the Einkorn all-purpose on Amazon. I just remembered. So yeah, Amazon also.
And we love little small health food stores are great. They're super enthusiastic about Einkorn. So I always like to kind of support the smaller vendors.
Yeah.
They kind of get it.
Yeah.
Whole Foods is great.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Perfect.
Yeah.
Next thing I really want to ask about, and this is a kind of a hot topic in sourdough as it is, and let alone with Einkorn, but hydration. So what is the overall impact of hydration with Einkorn? Does it absorb more water, less water? Just how does the dough feel? Can you kind of walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So Carla's starter, let me just talk about the starter, for instance. In the beginning, it was really confusing to me because I'm used to those images on, Instagram of that really bubbly starter kind of flowing out of the jar, and it's kind of pancake batter consistency and the bubbles are huge. And Einkorn, because of the delicate gluten, water is sort of a conduit for the culture that you're building. Because the gluten is very weak, our recipe in the cookbook is a low hydration starter. So everything is kind of slowed down by the presence of less water. The truth about the bread recipes and overall baking with Einkorn is that I believe it's the high mineral content. I'm not exactly sure what the reason is, but it will absorb water slower overall than modern wheat. So you'll find, Heather, you probably have done it where you picked the starter up and you were playing with it.
Yeah.
You let it sit a while and you come back, you'll find that, holy cow, all of a sudden it's a lot stickier and it is completely transformed. It takes its time absorbing water. So some of those properties can kind of get in the way of someone who's in a big rush.
Yeah.
You think you're going to add more water and it ends up being sticky mess and you can't even work with it. So patience helps. And hydration, I would say in this cookbook tends to be a little more conservative, a little less wet for the purposes of people starting out with Einkorn, because really high hydration would be almost impossible to get started with. It's very sticky dough.
Yeah. And also, you can correct if it's a little bit underhydrated, but you can't correct if it's overhydrated.
Yeah.
You've gone too far.
It's tough. And that is the weak gluten. That's why it doesn't hold together. I get extensibility and this elasticity mixed up, but it doesn't come together very easily. And it's tough to work with. So,
okay.
And before I forget, number one would be to weigh the ingredients. And that's always true for bakers, but with Einkorn, it's even more important for that reason, the hydration. If you are someone who scoops and dumps with your measuring, you're going to end up with way too much flour for the amount of water in the recipe. So weighing with a kitchen scale is super important.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes across the board. I think that's one thing I always say too. And I can include a link in the show notes to the kitchen scale that I've been using for 6 years now. And I've only had to change the batteries once and it was like $21. I think it's even cheaper now. So I think if there's not really an excuse to not have a kitchen scale, because they are so affordable. And it does make a big difference
It
in,
does.
like, even if you level out your scoop, it's not the same.
It's not the same. Yeah.
Like your cup of flour is not going to be the same as mine.
Right.
So yeah,
Right.
weighing it out is really good advice.
Yep. Yep.
And does einkorn affect other things as well? Like, does it affect oven spring? Are we going to see it as tall as a regular sourdough loaf? I know we did talk about crumb a little bit, so let's kind of
Yeah.
explore that a little bit, like the finished loaf.
Yep. So that's a super good question because I get this a lot. A standard bread recipe is, let it proof, wait till it doubles in size, and then shape it. You never want to let einkorn double in size, or you've gone way too far. Like the only
Okay.
way to get spring in the oven is to basically let it rise until it's about 40 to 50% bigger than when you put it in. So you have to capture all the activity in the oven, or it will just collapse and be very dense. You'll get these little sort of like damp spots, or you'll get like a condensed part at the bottom of the pan. And that's just the gluten is broken. You can't repair the gluten once it's broken. So the only way to sort of win with einkorn is to be is to be on top of it and to just not allow it to overproof. The reason why sourdough works so well is because that tends to be a slower process. And you're the sourdough mama, you're busy. I feel like people can really use sourdough to their advantage and use einkorn to their advantage because you can buy more time with sourdough. Yeast moves along too quickly in my opinion, with einkorn, people tend to not babysit it closely enough, and then it collapses and they don't get the spring. I'm going to hold up a crumb. I know we're in a podcast, but that is a typical einkorn crumb. This is a yeast bread. I didn't make this with sourdough, but that is about typical in what it looks like. The bubbles don't get big. But as you can see, I did get a decent dome on it. And
yeah, that's what I was just going to say. I mean,
yeah.
good oven spring, it looks like baked in a bread pan, but really
Yep.
good height on it. And I mean, the crumb to me looks fantastic. I prefer a tighter crumb.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think that looks wonderful.
And if it had overproofed, and this happens a lot for our customers with bread machines, we try to discourage them from letting the bread machine take over. But you would see sort of a dip in the middle, and that happens with regular modern wheat too. But you would see sort of a concave top to it.
Okay, interesting.
So yeah.
Okay. Wow, there's so many different properties about einkorn. This is so interesting.
Yeah.
My mind's going like, gosh, what should I ask next?
Yeah. Well, the sourdough, like if you've got a good strong einkorn, or excuse me, a good strong starter, you just have to get in a rhythm. You just have to know, your starter is this strong. You always want to bake on the rise. You want to move to the next step of a recipe on the rise and capture all that energy before it goes in the oven. Don't let it burn out. You don't want it to go that far.
That's excellent advice. And so I've been, as I talked about it a little while ago, I have been playing with my einkorn starter. And we talked a little bit before yeah, thank you. I'm so proud. Lauren and I talked a little bit about just before we started recording. When I first made it, I used my own starter, like my sourdough, my normal wheat starter. I just took a little bit of that and I just fed it as the book says. Like there's a little section on refreshing. And so I just pretended that it was, the einkorn starter, and I put some in, and that's how I started my einkorn starter. But I found, and maybe it's my altitude here, or maybe it's just, different variations in my kitchen, but the starter was very, very, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Like dry, but not crumbly. It was like holding a dough in my hand. And I was able to like roll it around in my hand like a ball. And I had a lot of fun with that. But what I did notice is that it wasn't really rising well in my jar. But I could see a little rise. I could see a dome, but it's almost as though it was too stiff to rise. And so what I told Lauren I did last night, and this is my result, is I did the exact same process, but I had the ball in my hand and I ran it under some water in the kitchen sink. And then I just kind of mashed it in my hands and worked the water in. And then I did it again. Cause in the book, it says that it should feel moist and almost like sticky. And so that's the consistency that I brought it to. I still had it in a ball and I like plunked it into the jar and put the lid on, and I woke up and that's what it looked like. So I feel like there's just with everything with sourdough, there's just this little bit of like manipulation you have to do with any recipe.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked about it too, that water. So I have trouble explaining sometimes to people, they think starter is the flour. And I'm like, starter's not the flour. The flour's the food.
Mm-hmm.
The water is the conduit for the culture, the wild yeast and the bacteria to grow. So a low hydration starter is going to not move the culture through the flour as quickly as a higher hydration starter. It's a slower process, which is, I think, what Carla was hoping would add to success with Einkorn. She didn't want to break that gluten.
Right.
But at the same time, with less water, you're going to get less activity. So I will do the same thing. I will pick it up in my hand. I'll be kneading it to try to, incorporate all the previous day's starter into the ball. And if it's too dry, I'll wet my hands. So sort of like what you did. I'll wet my hands and then I'll just kind of work it that way. And then mine, again, I'm holding this up and I know that we're not on camera for everyone, but this is what it looks like after. So it flattens out. It was completely a ball. It was like the size of a tangerine, maybe, when I made it. And it flattens out. And if you, let me get a fork. If you look inside of it, and this is what people, this, you can see all the bubbles in there, just like
just below the surface.
Just below the surface.
Yeah.
There's plenty of live culture in there, and it it's there, it's working, but you can increase the hydration if it's not working for you. Don't give up. The culture is growing. Just don't give up.
Yeah, that's what I always say. I'm like, please just don't throw it away. Don't throw it away.
Don't throw it away.
Please don't throw it away.
Yeah.
I had a really great question from Julie, a sourdough mama over on the Facebook group. She posted a picture of naan bread and she said she made it with einkorn. And she said, I think einkorn was a good choice for naan bread. Really nice flavor and texture. So her question was, what's the best way to use einkorn in sourdough and with discard recipes?
So discard is tough. And it's funny, I get so many questions about discard, and I actually love incorporating it into other things. I don't think too deeply about what I'm doing. I kind of just take that discard, I dilute it because ours is low hydration, so it's not something you can pour. I will take the discard and break it up in whatever the liquid part of the recipe is. So if I'm making banana bread and it calls for a cup of water, a cup of milk, I'll just dilute the starter in the liquid portion of the recipe and add it to whatever I'm making. Same is true for a pancake batter or a waffle batter, something like that. With a low hydration starter, you would just need to make sure you broke it up appropriately in the liquid portion of the recipe to move forward and use that discard. Carla's recipe is a pretty small little portion of starter because einkorn's really expensive. And so people are terrified and horrified at throwing or discarding any einkorn starter. All the more reason in my mind with your idea of increasing the hydration to get the activity really high is a good idea. You don't want to discard, and I understand that. So be creative, don't get stuck on it. You want to make a naan bread, a piadina, flatbread, a pita. You can add sourdough and use yeast too. If your sourdough isn't strong or you don't have enough sourdough, get a pinch of yeast in there and move forward. Don't let that stop you. You have to experiment in order to have success. So
yeah, absolutely. That's really good advice. What consistency do you tend to dilute your starter to when you're adding it like as the liquid in your discard recipes? Like you mentioned, you just dilute it. Like, would you make it like a batter or like a really watery dilution?
So the starter itself, it doesn't actually break down very well. If you've noticed, you put it into water, you have to use a fork. You have to really break it up with a fork. I suppose if you let it sit there for a while, it would completely dilute, but I just try to make, and I do this when I'm refreshing the starter as well. I try to just break it up into as small pieces as possible because I'm trying to distribute the culture throughout the liquid.
Right.
And the same is true when I'm adding it to other recipes. I'm really just trying to dilute it as much as I can, break it up as much as I can, make the liquid kind of creamy so I can see the culture is in the liquid before I move on. There's several recipes in the cookbook that don't use a levain. They do a direct sourdough into the recipe. The piadina is an Italian flatbread, like a sandwich, similar to a naan. And that uses sourdough. It's a direct sourdough, meaning no levain step. And that's a great one. It's really easy.
Is that because it doesn't require a lot, like a big quantity, or what's the reason why there's no?
I think because not every recipe needs to be a 2-day process, like with a 6-hour levain and so forth. I think she recognized that. And a piadina is like a lunch bread. It's quick and it's still an hour or two complete. I think the total amount of time and taken on it. You need a nice active starter to get that, but it's also a flatbread you cook in a pan. You don't need that huge domed, loaf. You're not looking for that much activity. You're looking for a little leavening, and that's it. So
okay, that's piquing my interest, because I'm like, maybe I could make that with this today.
You should try it. It's a good recipe.
Yeah, I absolutely will. This is such a great cookbook. I'm so excited that I found it. I found it when I was kind of thinking and researching podcast topics, funnily enough, because I've heard of Einkorn. Like Kristen at Foolproof Baking has played with Einkorn. A lot of bakers on Instagram have played with Einkorn, and you hear it and you're like, what's this silly flour? I have a good system. I don't really need it. At least that was my thought. And and my life's busy enough. So I'm like, I just don't have time. I've had a mock mill KitchenAid attachment to grind my own flour for almost a year, and I just used it yesterday for the first time. So because I have these like ambitious ideas and thoughts and dreams with bread, and life just gets in the way because I'm busy. But then I was looking up podcast topic ideas, and I was like, well, we should talk about Einkorn for one of them, and looked up the book and I found it, and then I read a lot about it, and it like ignited this fire. I was like, wow, how are not more people talking about this? This is so fascinating.
And
I feel like it's
hope,
like a little secret.
And I hope it leads to people experimenting more. Like, we don't sell spelt or teff or any of the other ancient grains. But I encourage people on the phone when I talk to people trying recipes, if you're not eating einkorn because you're gluten sensitive, experiment with mixing it with a strong, really high protein glutinous flour. Try to get the flavor, impart the flavor into other things by incorporating einkorn into what you're baking with. You don't need to go all in with einkorn, but it's a great flour. It's delicious and it's healthy. It's got all these, things going for it. You should just try. You should get a bag and like start working with it. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can be, you can incorporate it into your baking.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was actually one other question I had too. Just like, I guess, setting expectations for what to expect when you add einkorn or sub it in place of other flours. And it sounds like the kind of big takeaway is that it will act a little bit differently with the water absorption. That's the biggest factor?
That is the biggest. I would say the second biggest, maybe on par with the water, is that it won't absorb as much fat.
Okay.
So I just had a woman ask me the other day, she made Toll House cookies and she used einkorn. And she ended up with a very flat, spread out cookie. And there was a lot of butter on the tray when she took them off the tray. It was almost like a crinkle cookie. And she was upset, understandably. It just doesn't, I think it's the mineral content. It just can't absorb that much fat. So in my mind, that's a good thing, right? I can make a chocolate chip cookie with less butter. I mean, this is great. So Carla, in her cookbook, she has a version of, a Toll House cookie recipe that uses less butter than the recipe. So that is an important factor. You will find not every recipe has fat in it, but you will find you can get away with about 20% less butter, oil, or fat when baking with einkorn. So I think that's a win.
Yeah, absolutely.
And something to remember if you're playing with it is to cut back on the fat as well. Give it time to absorb water, cut back on the fat.
Right. And experiment and take notes as well, right?
Take notes,
Yeah. That's always my biggest thing. It's like, if you make a change and it comes out great, how are you going to know to replicate it? Like, So,
I get a lot of questions where people, tick off like 5 or 6 things that they did on a recipe. And I'm like, and there's no way I can help at this point. I don't know. Like, there's too many factors that are
That's it. Yeah. And also,
So.
yeah, that's another piece of advice I tend to give too, is just change one thing at a time so that you
Right.
know which thing it was that made the difference. So,
Right.
yeah, I really like the idea of incorporating it into recipes. And that's really great to know about, if you're adding, does the same thing happen with milk, but to a lesser degree because milk has milk fats?
Yeah, it's not as noticeable.
Okay.
I think I'm talking mostly solid fats. I
Yeah.
don't think you would see a huge difference with, say, and you can do a lot of subbing. You can sub just like you can in regular baking. You can sub nut milks if you're dairy free. You can sub in coconut oil if you are avoiding butter. But I wouldn't worry too much about the liquid fat content in the recipes. I don't think you would see I haven't seen a huge difference in that.
It's because it's probably so minuscule compared to, a cup of butter or,
Exactly,
lard or
yeah.
Crisco or whatever people are
Right.
using.
Right.
So what is the best way for a beginner to get started with Einkorn? Like, what are the steps that they should take to kind of get started on this journey?
So if they want to try sourdough, I think I would recommend sourdough is the preferred way to bake with einkorn because, as we first said, the slow, gentle rise, yeast often proofs too quickly and breaks the wheat gluten, and that'll lead to disappointment. You're going to end up with an unfortunate dense loaf that's not necessary. So if you have an existing starter, transition it over to our starter recipe. Everything, not quite one-to-one in the cookbook, is on the website, but our website is a huge resource for sourdough questions, original recipes and recipe questions and answers underneath. We do have a very basic yeast sandwich recipe that's like under 2 hours. You can try to just kind of get the feeling of the dough by working with it in a very plain, simple bread recipe.
Mm-hmm.
But I would start with a starter and just get your hands in there and work with the dough. Don't be afraid it's going to be edible. It's going to be delicious. Don't be afraid to have it not come out perfect. I can't, coach people through a recipe they're not willing to try themselves. So you have to jump in and try. And there's a bunch of recipes on our site, like I said, including, this is actually really important. Carla recorded a couple of years ago an entire series of videos that are on YouTube. You can access through our website, where she actually is right in this kitchen, right here where I'm standing. She did a sandwich loaf. She did a French boule. She made the sourdough starter from scratch. She made the levain, and she stands here and explains the whole thing and the difference between the flour. So if you're really curious about seeing her work with it, her hands are magic. She just does an amazing job sort of explaining it. I recommend the YouTube videos from our website. So
yeah, I'll link to those as well in the show notes. And you guys can find those at leavenly.com/podcast.
Yeah.
That's really helpful because a lot of people are very visual learners, myself included.
Yeah.
It's so helpful to see someone else's hands in the dough and say like, okay, that is what it's supposed to look like, or
Yes.
this isn't at all what it's supposed to look like.
I watch her shape the dough hundreds of times, and I refer people to like the exact minute on the video, like where watch what she does right here. Because you can tell by watching the dough and how she's handling it. You can tell it's different. You can tell it doesn't look like the other sourdough videos you've seen. It's you can tell by watching. Yeah. So that's important to know that it is supposed to be that way.
That's good to know because it is so very different. Yeah. I wanted to ask one last question, and it's not a personal question, but I want an answer to it myself. In the book, she talks about rolling out einkorn berries to make einkorn flakes, like oats and things like that, like rolled oats, but like rolled einkorn. Is that something that you guys sell as a product, or?
We get asked that a lot. It's funny. Carla was born right here. We were in Connecticut. She was born right in New London, Connecticut, but she went away to college in Bologna and met her husband and never came back. So good for her. We're all like, what is flaking a grain? Like nobody does that here. So it's kind of funny because she's over in Italy and there are just some things that she was doing that were like, nobody does that here. So there is a contraption that you can buy. I think there's even add-ons to a KitchenAid mixture. It's called a flaker, and you can flake any grain. You can flake einkorn, you can flake oats, you can do You can do anything. We don't actually have one here. And I have never flaked einkorn. I've never flaked any grain. But people do ask, and you can make cereal out of it, and it sounds kind of cool.
That's what I thought. I was like,
Yeah.
maybe there's like a way that I can try this without having to get the little machine, but it sounds like I'm just
Yeah.
gonna have to get the machine.
Yeah. And einkorn makes amazing, it's a grain. It makes amazing porridge if you want to just, crack it and cook it like oatmeal. Wheat berry salads are delicious. You can use wheat berries a lot of ways. It's not just the flour. And like I said, we make sourdough crackers, we make einkorn cookies, we make pasta, all out of einkorn. And we have delicious Italian tomatoes, olive oil, bunch of products, great products.
Sounds amazing. You're making me hungry.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so helpful, Lauren. Thank you so much. And to kind of wrap up, I think we talked about that people can find you guys on the website. Is there any other place that they can go to get more information? Anywhere they can follow you guys?
Yep. So that on the website, if you're just on the main page, you can also sign up for our newsletter. It's an e-newsletter. We don't bombard you, but it'll often include a recipe here and there. Any sales that we're having on specific products or promotions, you'll get a little ping and 20% off this product or that product. So I recommend that because that's probably the best way to keep in touch with us in terms of what's going on and what's available. But again, the einkorn section of the website, the blog, the YouTube channel are all really filled with information, and you can always call or email me, and I'm happy to help too.
Oh, that's so helpful. So is it jovialfoods.com?
Yep, jovialfoods.com.
Perfect. And we'll have links to all those resources as well in the show notes. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us. This has been so helpful, and I'm really excited to go bake with some einkorn. So you're
let me know how it goes.
I really appreciate that.
Good. Let me know how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.